In the quiet village of St. Mary's Mead, a poet's quill becomes a weapon of death, laced with poison that silences Leonard Grayson forever. Hercule Poirot unravels a web of vengeance, desperation, and devotion where a critic's wounded pride, a publisher's crumbling empire, and a fan's obsessive love collide. As secrets spill from inked pages, one truth emerges: words can kill. Will Poirot's little grey cells expose the murderer before the quill's shadow falls again? Chapter 1. The Silent Muse. The village of St. Mary's Mead lay nestled in a gentle curve of the English countryside, its cottages wreathed in ivy, and its lanes alive with the rustle of autumn leaves. On this particular October morning, the air carried a crisp bite, and the sun, low and golden, painted long shadows across the cobblestones. The village, known for its quiet charm, was unaccustomed to scandal, yet a murmur of unease rippled through its heart. Leonard Grayson, the poet whose verses had stirred both admiration and ire, was dead. The discovery was made by Lily, Grayson's young maid, who had arrived at his cottage, Rosehaven, to light the morning fire. She found him slumped over his desk in the study, his face ashen, his eyes staring blankly at the unfinished lines of a poem. In his right hand he clutched an antique quill, its silver nib gleaming faintly in the dawn light. A cry had escaped Lily's lips, alerting a passing neighbour, and soon the village constable, Mr. Dobbs, was summoned. His ruddy face paled as he examined the scene, and it was he who sent for Hercule Poirot. Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective, with a moustache as precise as his mind, was no stranger to St. Mary's Mead. He had come to visit his old friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, who had taken a small house for the season to escape the clamour of London. The two were sharing a pot of tea when Constable Dobbs knocked, his hat in hand, his voice tremulous. "Mr. Poirot, sir, we need your help. It's Mr. Grayson. Dead, and it ain't natural. The doctor says poison, and there's something queer about that quill of his." Poirot's green eyes sharpened, and he set down his cup with deliberate care. "Poison, you say? And a quill? Très intéressant. Hastings, mon ami, fetch your coat. We must see this for ourselves." Rosehaven was a modest but elegant cottage, its garden a riot of late-blooming roses. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and ink. The study, at the back of the house, was a sanctuary of creativity. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes stretched to the ceiling, their spines worn from years of handling. A typewriter sat on a side table, its keys silent, while the desk at the centre bore the weight of Grayson's final moments. Papers lay scattered, drafts of poems, some crossed out, others annotated in a bold, looping hand. An ink bottle, half full, stood beside a blotting pad, and at the edge of the desk lay the quill, its feather slightly bent, as if it had been gripped too tightly. Poirot stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted as he absorbed every detail. The poet's body had been removed, but the chair remained askew, and a faint stain marked the desk where Grayson's hand had rested. Hastings, hovering near the door, shifted uncomfortably. "Ghastly business, Poirot. Do you think it was suicide?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his disapproval. "Suicide, Hastings? No, no. A poet does not choose so theatrical a method to end his life. This quill, it is not merely an instrument of writing. It is a clue, perhaps the clue. Observe the nib. It is not tarnished, yet there is a faint discoloration. And the ink bottle, it is undisturbed. No signs of spillage. This was no accident." He bent closer, his gloved fingers hovering over the quill without touching it. The poison. It was delivered through the quill, I suspect. Aconite, perhaps, or something equally swift. We shall await the doctor's report. But already, the little grey cells, they begin to stir. Constable Dobbs, standing awkwardly by the window, cleared his throat. Mr. Grayson was well liked, sir, but he had a sharp tongue. His poems, they could cut deep. Some folk didn't take kindly to it. Poirot turned, his eyes narrowing. And who, pray, are these folk? We must know those who were close to Monsieur Grayson, those who might have wished him harm. Dobbs hesitated, then listed 3 names. Evelyn Marsh, a critic whose reviews had sparred with Grayson's work, Victor Crane, his publisher, known to argue over contracts, and Clara Bell, a young woman whose devotion to the poet bordered on fervour. They were all at his signing last night, at the village hall, Dobbs added. Miss Lily saw them there. Poirot nodded, his mind already weaving patterns. A critic, a publisher, a fan. Each with a connection to the poet, each with a reason, perhaps, to resent him. We shall speak with them. But first, this room. It must tell us more. He moved to the desk, examining the papers. The unfinished poem, written in Grayson's hand, spoke of betrayal and hidden truths, its lines jagged, as if written in haste. A single phrase stood out. The quill betrays the hand that wields it. Poirot's lips curved slightly. Poetic, n'est-ce pas? But also, perhaps, prophetic. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden shafts through the window, Poirot stepped back, his expression one of quiet determination. This is no ordinary murder, Hastings. It is a crime of precision, of passion concealed behind the elegance of a poet's life. The quill, it is the key. And Hercule Poirot, he shall unlock its secrets. Chapter 2. The suspects emerge. The village hall of St. Mary's Mead, a squat stone building with leaded windows and a slightly sagging roof, stood at the heart of the village, its interior warmed by the glow of a single chandelier. It was here, on the Eintime evening prior to Leonard Grayson's death, that the poet had held his final public appearance, a signing event for his latest collection, Whispers of the Thorn. The hall, now empty save for the echoes of last night's chatter, was where Hercule Poirot chose to begin his investigation proper. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and lingering perfume, and the detective's polished shoes clicked softly on the floorboards as he surveyed the room. Captain Hastings, trailing behind, adjusted his tie nervously. "I say, Poirot, it's a bit grim to think a murder was planned in such a cheerful setting. All those people laughing, clapping, oblivious to what was coming." Poirot's moustache quivered, a sign of his concentration. "Oui, mon ami, but it is precisely in such settings, where smiles mask intentions, that murder finds its stage. The signing, it was the moment of opportunity. We must recreate it in our minds. Note every detail, every glance, every gesture." Constable Dobbs had arranged for the 3 principal suspects to meet Poirot at the hall. As the clock struck 11, they arrived, each entering with a distinct air of unease. Poirot stood near the table where Grayson had sat, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes darting from one face to another, reading the unspoken language of their movements. First came Evelyn Marsh, a woman of 40, with a severe elegance that seemed to chill the room. Her auburn hair was pulled tightly into a bun, and her grey eyes, sharp as a hawk's, betrayed a mind accustomed to dissection. She wore a tailored coat of dark green, its buttons gleaming like small coins, and her gloved hands were folded primly before her. As a literary critic for the London Review, her pen had been both a scalpel and a bludgeon, particularly when it came to Grayson's work. Her reviews, laced with biting wit, had branded his poetry as pretentious fluff and a mockery of true art. Yet Grayson had not been one to suffer in silence. His poem, The Critic's Claw, had turned her own venom against her, exposing her insecurities to public ridicule. The memory of that humiliation, Poirot noted, lingered in the set of her jaw. Next entered Victor Crane, a man whose nervous energy seemed to vibrate through his slight frame. His suit, though well cut, hung loosely on him, as if he had lost weight under the strain of his profession. As Grayson's publisher at Crane & Sons, a small but ambitious firm, he had staked much on the poet's success. His hands, stained with ink and trembling slightly, betrayed a life spent juggling manuscripts and egos. Crane's eyes darted about the room, avoiding Poirot's gaze, and his fingers tugged at a loose thread on his cuff. He had been at odds with Grayson over royalties, a fact whispered about in literary circles, and the poet's threats to seek a new publisher had left Crane in a precarious position. Finally, Clara Bell slipped into the hall, her presence almost ghostly. A young woman of no more than 25, she had the delicate features of a porcelain doll, with wide blue eyes and a cascade of chestnut curls. Her hands clutched a worn copy of Whispers of the Thorn, its pages dog-eared and marked with fervent annotations. Clara was Grayson's most ardent admirer, a regular at his readings, her devotion bordering on worship. Yet there was a fragility to her, a tremor in her voice that suggested something deeper than mere fandom. She wore a simple blue dress, its hem slightly frayed, and her eyes flickered with a mix of grief and defiance as she met Poirot's scrutiny. Poirot gestured for them to sit at a long oak table, its surface still bearing faint ink smudges from the signing. He remained standing, his small stature somehow commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "the death of Leonard Grayson was no accident. It was murder, executed with a poisoned quill, a weapon both subtle and cruel. You three were among the last to see him alive, here in this very hall. I wish to know your movements, your words, your thoughts. Speak freely, but know that Hercule Poirot listens not only to what is said, but to what is not." Evelyn Marsh was the first to break the silence, her tone clipped and imperious. "This is absurd, Mr. Poirot. I attended the signing, yes, but I left early. Grayson's work was tiresome, and I had no reason to linger. As for killing him, ridiculous. I'm a critic, not a criminal." Her gloved hands tightened, and Poirot noted the faint creak of leather. "You did not care for his poetry, mademoiselle," he said, his eyes narrowing. "And he, in turn, did not care for your critiques. His poem, The Critic's Claw, it caused you pain, no?" Marsh's lips thinned, but she held his gaze. "It was a childish jab, nothing more. I've endured worse. I left the hall at 9 o'clock, as the librarian, Mrs. Whitby, can confirm." Her voice was steady, but Poirot detected a flicker of unease in her posture, a slight shift in her chair. Victor Crane cleared his throat, his voice a nervous rasp. "I was here until the end, Mr. Poirot, managing the book sales. Grayson was my best author, you see. Difficult, yes, but brilliant. Why would I want him dead? Without him, Crane & Sons is in trouble." He paused, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "We had our disagreements, royalties, contracts, but that's business. I stayed to lock up, then went home. Ask anyone." Poirot tilted his head, studying Crane's twitching fingers. "And yet, monsieur, you were seen near Grayson's table, adjusting papers. Papers, perhaps, that were close to his quill." Crane flushed, his eyes widening. "I was tidying up. It's my job to keep things orderly. I didn't touch his quill, I swear." Clara Bell's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Mr. Grayson was a genius. His words, they spoke to my soul. I could never hurt him. She clutched her book tighter, her knuckles white. I stayed late to get my copy signed. He was kind, even when I asked for a special inscription. I touched his quill once, just to feel it. But that's all. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, as if the memory of Grayson's smile was too much to bear. Poirot paced slowly before them, his hands still clasped behind his back. "Each of you," he said, "has a connection to the victim, and each, perhaps, a reason to wish him harm. The critic, wounded by his words, the publisher, strained by his demands, the fan, whose devotion may hide a darker obsession. But it is the quill that interests me most. It was poisoned, yes, but when and how?" He turned to Constable Dobbs, who stood by the door, his notebook open. "Monsieur Dobbs, what do we know of the signing itself? The crowd? The atmosphere?" Dobbs consulted his notes. "It was a busy evening, sir. About 50 people, locals mostly, though some came from neighbouring villages. Grayson was at that table there, signing books and chatting. Miss Marsh had a bit of a row with him. Something about his latest poem. Mr. Crane was bustling about, selling books and keeping things moving. Miss Bell was hovering, always near Grayson, asking questions. The quill was on the table, out in the open. No one saw anything odd, but it was crowded, and people were coming and going." Poirot nodded, his mind reconstructing the scene. The table, positioned near the center of the hall, would have been surrounded by admirers, their voices a hum of excitement. Grayson, with his sharp wit and commanding presence, would have drawn all eyes. The quill, an antique with a silver nib, was a focal point, a relic of the poet's craft. To poison it required not only opportunity, but audacity. A fleeting moment when attention was elsewhere. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot said, turning to Clara. "When you touched the quill, was it during the signing or after?" Clara blinked, her cheeks flushing. "During, I think. He let me hold it for a moment while he signed my book. It was beautiful, like something from another time." "And you, Monsieur Crane," Poirot continued. "You were near the table often. Did you see anyone else handle the quill?" Crane shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. It was Grayson's pride and joy. He didn't let just anyone touch it." Poirot's gaze shifted to Evelyn Marsh. "And you, mademoiselle, you argued with Grayson. Was it near the table? Close enough, perhaps, to notice the quill?" Marsh's eyes narrowed. "I was nowhere near his precious quill. Our disagreement was brief, and I left soon after. I had no interest in his theatrics." Poirot paused, letting the silence stretch. He had learned much, but not enough. The suspects' stories were plausible, yet each held a thread of doubt. Marsh's gloves, worn even now, suggested a careful nature, perhaps too careful. Crane's nervous demeanor hinted at secrets beyond financial strain, and Clara's devotion, so fervent, could mask a motive yet unseen. He addressed them all. The poison, it was aconite applied to the quill's nib, a rare and deadly substance requiring knowledge and precision. One of you, I believe, had both. I ask you to reflect, to consider what you saw, what you did. The truth, it will emerge, for Hercule Poirot doesn't rest until it does. As the suspects filed out, their faces a mix of defiance and fear, Hastings approached. What do you make of them, Poirot? They all seem plausible, yet none quite fit the bill. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming. They are like characters in one of Grayson's poems, Hastings, each with a role, each with a shadow. The critic hides her anger behind intellect, the publisher his desperation behind duty, the fan her passion behind innocence. But one of them has played a part too well. We shall return to the cottage, mon ami. The study. It holds more secrets yet. As they left the hall, the autumn wind stirred the leaves outside, whispering through the village like the echo of Grayson's unfinished verse. Poirot's mind, however, was far from poetic. It was a machine, precise and relentless, piecing together the fragments of a murder most cunning. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Quill. The late morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Rosehaven, casting delicate patterns across the study where Leonard Grayson had met his end. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small frame dwarfed by the towering bookshelves, yet his presence filled the space with an air of quiet authority. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, hovered near the door, his notebook open, though he scribbled little, preferring to watch Poirot's meticulous process. The constable, Mr. Dobbs, had delivered the coroner's preliminary report, and its contents had set Poirot's grey cells ablaze. "Aconite," Poirot murmured, his gloved fingers hovering over the antique quill that lay on Grayson's desk, now cordoned off by a thin rope to preserve the scene. "A poison most rare, most deadly. A single scratch from this quill, and death would come swiftly, silently. Mon ami, this is no crime of impulse. It is a work of precision." Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. "But Poirot, how could someone poison the quill without Grayson noticing? He was particular about his tools, wasn't he? Surely he'd have seen something amiss." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at Hastings's straightforward logic. "Particular, oui, but even the most particular man may be distracted. The signing, Hastings. It was a moment of chaos, a crowd pressing close, voices overlapping. The murderer needed only seconds to act. But come, let us examine this quill more closely." The quill was a thing of beauty, its shaft a deep ebony feather, its silver nib engraved with intricate filigree. It rested beside an ink bottle, a blotting pad, and a scattering of papers, including the poet's final, unfinished verse. Poirot noted the absence of any protective covering on the desk, no cloth, no gloves, nothing to suggest Grayson had handled the quill with caution. "He used it as he always did," Poirot said, his voice low. "He dipped it in ink," he wrote, "and in doing so, he sealed his fate." Constable Dobbs, lingering near the window, coughed nervously. "The doctor says the aconite was on the nib, Mr. Poirot. Enough to kill in minutes, but how it got there, we can't fathom. Nobody saw anyone tampering with it at the signing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nobody saw, or nobody noticed. There is a difference, Monsieur Dobbs. The human eye, it sees what it expects to see. A clever hand, moving swiftly, could escape detection." He turned to the desk, his gaze sweeping over its contents. The ink bottle was half full, its contents undisturbed, and the blotting pad showed no signs of smudging beyond the poet's usual scrawl. Yet something caught Poirot's eye, a faint, almost imperceptible sheen on the quill's nib, visible only in the slant of the sunlight. He beckoned Dobbs closer. "You see this, monsieur? A residue, not ink, but something else. The aconite, perhaps, or a carrier for it. We must have this analysed further." He made a note to send the quill to a chemist in London, one whose precision matched his own. Hastings, ever practical, ventured a theory. Could it have been an accident, Poirot? Perhaps Grayson poisoned the quill himself, unknowingly. Some chemical in his ink, maybe. Poirot shook his head, his expression one of gentle reproach. "Non, Hastings. A poet does not poison his own quill by mistake. Aconite is not a substance one stumbles upon in a village cottage. It is extracted from the monk's hood plant, handled with care, and applied with intent. This was murder, deliberate and cruel." To confirm his suspicions, Poirot turned to Lily, the maid, who had been summoned back to Rosehaven. She stood in the doorway, her apron twisted in her hands, her eyes red from crying. "Lily, ma petite," Poirot said, his tone softening. "You were at the signing last night, oui? Tell me, what did you see of Monsieur Grayson and his quill?" Lily's voice trembled as she spoke. "He was at the table, sir, signing books. That quill, it was special to him. He'd had it for years, a gift, he said, from someone important. He wouldn't let anyone touch it, except maybe Miss Bell, who begged to hold it. Miss Marsh, she was cross with him, arguing about some poem. Mr. Crane was there too, fussing with the books, looking all nervous-like." Poirot nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And the quill, Lily, was it ever left unattended?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, sir. It was so busy. People crowding round, asking for signatures. I saw Mr. Grayson set the quill down once or twice to shake hands or turn a page, but I didn't see anyone touch it. Not really." "Not really?" Poirot's voice was sharp, catching the nuance. "What do you mean, mademoiselle?" Lily flushed. "Well, sir, I saw Miss Marsh lean over the table during their argument. Her hand was near the quill, but I thought she was just pointing at something. And Mr. Crane, he was moving papers around, like he always does. Miss Bell, she held the quill for a moment, but Mr. Grayson was right there, watching." Poirot filed these details away, his mind a tapestry of threads waiting to be woven. "Merci, Lily. You have been most helpful. Now tell me, did anyone else approach the table closely? A stranger, perhaps?" Lily shook her head. "No strangers, sir. Just the usual folk. Villagers, a few from out of town. Everyone knew Mr. Grayson's quill. He made a show of it, dipping it in ink, flourishing it about." Poirot dismissed her gently, then turned to Hastings. The signing, it was the moment of opportunity, but also of risk. The murderer needed knowledge of Grayson's habits, his love for this quill, his insistence on using it. They needed access to aconite, and the nerve to apply it in a crowded room. He moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where roses drooped under the weight of morning dew. "Consider, Hastings, the suspects. Evelyn Marsh, she is a woman of intellect, with access to chemical knowledge from her studies. Her gloves, they are curious, non? Worn even indoors, perhaps to shield her hands from poison. Victor Crane, he is a man under pressure, his livelihood tied to Grayson. A desperate man might take desperate measures. And Clara Bell, her devotion. It is intense, almost unnatural. Could it have turned to resentment?" Hastings scratched his chin. "It's a devilish puzzle, Poirot. Any of them could have done it, but none seem the type to handle poison so boldly." Poirot smiled, a faint curve of his lips. Boldness, Hastings, is not always loud. It can be quiet, calculated, hidden in a gesture as simple as adjusting a paper or leaning across a table. We must dig deeper, into their motives, their opportunities, their secrets. He returned to the desk, his eyes lingering on the unfinished poem. The lines spoke of betrayal, of a truth hidden in plain sight. Grayson knew something, Poirot mused. His words, they were not just art, they were a mirror, reflecting the hearts of those around him. And one of those hearts, it struck back. As they prepared to leave the study, Poirot paused, his gaze falling on a small detail, a single feather, detached from the quill, lying unnoticed beneath the desk. He knelt, retrieving it with a handkerchief. "Curieux," he murmured. "This feather, it is not broken, but plucked. An accident or a sign of haste." He tucked the feather away, his mind already racing ahead. "Come, Hastings, we must speak to the chemist, and then to the witnesses from the signing. The quill has spoken, but its story is not yet complete. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth, one thread at a time." The study fell silent as they departed, the quill resting on the desk like a sentinel, its silver nib glinting with the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Chapter 4. The Critic's Grudge. The afternoon light in St. Mary's Mead had softened, casting a mellow glow over the village as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings made their way to the modest tea-room where Evelyn Marsh had agreed to meet them. The tea-room, with its chintz curtains and mismatched china, was a hub of village gossip, its tables occupied by locals whispering about the poet's untimely death. Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his moustache waxed to perfection, drew curious glances as he entered, his air of quiet authority at odds with the homely setting. Evelyn Marsh sat at a corner table, her posture rigid, a cup of tea untouched before her. Her dark green coat was draped over the chair, revealing a severe black dress that seemed to absorb the light. Her gloves, Poirot noted, remained on, their leather gleaming faintly as she folded her hands. She regarded Poirot with a cool, assessing gaze, her grey eyes betraying nothing but a faint irritation. "Bonjour, Mademoiselle Marsh," Poirot began, settling into a chair opposite her, his movements deliberate. Hastings took a seat beside him, his notebook at the ready, though he sensed Poirot would rely more on memory than written notes. "I thank you for meeting us. The matter of Monsieur Grayson's death, it is most grave, and your insight, as one who knew him well, is invaluable." Marsh's lips curled slightly, a gesture that might have been a smile but carried no warmth. "Knew him well? Hardly. I knew his work, Mr. Poirot, and found it wanting. As for the man, he was an arrogant fool who thought his rhymes made him untouchable." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Arrogant, you say? And yet his poem, The Critic's Claw, it struck a nerve, no? It was read publicly, at a literary gathering in London last spring. The audience, they laughed, and you, mademoiselle, were the subject of their mirth." Marsh's fingers tightened around her gloves, the leather creaking softly. "It was a petty attack," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Grayson lacked the originality to create, without resorting to cheap satire. I was humiliated, yes, but I've endured worse. A critic learns to weather such storms." Poirot nodded, his expression one of polite interest, though his mind was cataloguing every nuance of her demeanour. "And yet, mademoiselle, such a public wound, it festers. You are a woman of intellect, of pride. to be mocked before your peers. Surely that was not easily forgotten. Marsh leaned back, her eyes narrowing. You think I poisoned his quill out of spite? That's absurd. I'm a scholar, not a murderer. I left the signing early, as I told you. Mrs. Whitby, the Oimuhor librarian, saw me go at 9 o'clock. I had no reason to linger in Grayson's presence. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his quiet amusement. The librarian. She confirms your departure. Oui. But the signing began at 7, and the hall was crowded. 2 hours, mademoiselle, is ample time for a clever person to act. And your gloves, they are most curious. You wear them even now, in this warm tea-room. Is it a habit or a precaution? Marsh's gaze flickered, but she recovered quickly. A habit, she said curtly. My hands are sensitive to the cold. Surely you don't suspect me of hiding poison beneath my gloves? Poirot did not answer directly, instead shifting his approach. You studied chemistry at university, I understand. Aconite, the poison used to kill Monsieur Grayson, is not a substance one encounters by chance. It requires knowledge, access, preparation. You, mademoiselle, have the intellect for such a task. Marsh's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. You flatter me, Mr. Poirot, but you're reaching. Yes, I studied chemistry years ago, but so do many scholars. Aconite is rare, I'll grant you, but I have no access to it, nor any desire to dabble in poisons. I deal in words, not death. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. Words, mademoiselle, can be as deadly as poison. Grayson's words wounded you, and perhaps you sought to wound him in return. During the signing, you argued with him, near his table. Lily, the maid, saw you lean close, your hand near the quill. A moment of distraction, a quick motion. Would it not have been possible? Marsh's face paled, but her voice remained steady. I leaned over to make a point, nothing more. Grayson was insufferable, taunting me about my reviews. I told him his work was derivative, and he laughed in my face. I left soon after. If you're looking for someone with a grudge, try Victor Crane. He was sweating bullets over Grayson's demands for more money. Poirot noted the deflection, his mind filing it away. Merci, Mademoiselle Marsh. You have been most forthcoming. But the little grey cells, they are not yet satisfied. We shall speak again. As Marsh rose to leave, her movements brisk, Poirot watched her closely. The gloves, the chemistry background, the public humiliation, all pointed to a motive, yet her alibi held, and her composure was formidable. He turned to Hastings, who had been scribbling furiously. What do you think, mon ami? Is she the serpent behind the quill, or merely a woman scorned? Hastings frowned, closing his notebook. She's sharp as a tack, Poirot, and cold as ice. I wouldn't put it past her to hold a grudge, but poison? It seems so. Extreme for a critic. Still, those gloves bother me. Why wear them indoors? Poirot smiled faintly. The gloves. They are a detail most curious. They protect, oui. But from what? The cold, as she claims, or the residue of a poison? We must verify her alibi with this Mrs. Whitby, and we must learn more of her access to aconite. But for now, let us return to Rosehaven. The study, it calls to us. Back at the poet's cottage, the air was heavy with the scent of old paper and fading roses. Poirot stood once more in the study, his eyes drawn to the desk where the quill lay, its silver nib glinting like a silent accusation. He had sent the quill for further analysis, but its presence lingered in his mind, a symbol of Grayson's craft and his demise. He moved to the bookshelves, scanning the titles, poetry, philosophy, and, curiously, a slim volume on toxicology, its pages unmarked but well worn. "Hastings," Poirot said, holding up the book. "This is unexpected, no? A poet with an interest in poisons. Or perhaps it belonged to another?" Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Could be Grayson's, but it's odd. Maybe he was researching for a poem, or maybe someone left it here to throw us off." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A possibility, oui. But the little grey cells, they suggest another thought. Grayson's poems, they were not merely art. They were weapons aimed at those who crossed him. Evelyn Marsh was one such target. We must learn if others felt the sting of his quill." He moved to the desk, sifting through the papers. Among them was a draft of the Critic's Claw, its lines sharp and mocking, with a marginal note in Grayson's hand. "E.M. will choke on this." Poirot's lips curved slightly. The poet, he knew the power of his words, and Evelyn Marsh, she felt their bite. But was it enough to drive her to murder? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the study, Poirot stepped back, his mind a whirl of connections. The grudge of the critic, it is deep, Hastings. But is it deadly? We shall see. Tomorrow we speak to Victor Crane. The publisher, he has his own burdens, and perhaps his own secrets. The room fell silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves outside, as if the village itself were whispering clues that only Poirot's keen mind could decipher. Chapter 5. The Publisher's Burden. The morning mist clung to the lanes of St. Mary's Mead, shrouding the village in a veil of grey, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings made their way to the modest office of Crane and Sons, publishers, located in a narrow building just off the high street. The sign above the door was faded, its gold lettering chipped, a testament to the firm's precarious fortunes. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ink and dust, and shelves sagged under the weight of unsold manuscripts. Victor Crane, the man at the heart of this struggling enterprise, awaited them, his nervous energy palpable even from a distance. Poirot, his black patent shoes gleaming despite the damp, stepped into the office with the air of a man entering a battlefield. His moustache was impeccably groomed, and his eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the cluttered room. A desk buried under. Papers, a typewriter with a jammed key, and a single window admitting a feeble light. Hastings followed, his overcoat slightly askew, his expression one of cautious curiosity. Victor Crane rose from his chair, his thin frame trembling as he extended a hand. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming. This business with Grayson, it's a nightmare. I can't believe he's gone." His voice cracked, and his ink-stained fingers fidgeted with a pen, betraying a man on the edge of collapse. Poirot inclined his head, his gaze never leaving Crane's face. "Monsieur Crane, the death of Leonard Grayson is indeed a tragedy, but it is also a crime. You were close to him, professionally and perhaps personally. I wish to understand your relationship, your movements, your burdens." Crane sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. "Burdens? You've no idea, Mr. Poirot. Grayson was my star, my only real success. His books sold when others didn't. But he was difficult, always demanding more, higher royalties, bigger advances. He threatened to leave for a London publisher last month. It would have ruined me." Poirot settled into a chair opposite, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "Ruined, you say? That is a strong word, monsieur. Tell me, how dire was the situation for Crane and Sons?" Crane's eyes darted to the window, as if seeking escape. dire enough. We're a small press, Mr. Poirot. Grayson's whispers of the thorn kept us afloat, but he wanted terms we couldn't afford. I begged him to stay, offered him everything I could. He laughed, said I was a fool to think he'd settle for less. Hastings, standing near a shelf of unsold poetry collections, raised an eyebrow. Sounds like he had you over a barrel, Crane. That's motive enough for some, don't you think? Poirot shot Hastings a glance, a silent reminder to let him lead. Motive, oui, but we seek the truth, not assumptions. Monsieur Crane, you were at the signing in the village hall. You were seen near Grayson's table, handling papers. Papers, perhaps, that were close to his quill? Crane's face flushed, and he wiped his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. I was organizing the books, Mr. Poirot, making sure everything ran smoothly. It's my job. I didn't touch his quill. I wouldn't dare. He was particular about it. Treated it like a relic. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the tremor in Crane's voice. Particular, oui, and yet the quill was poisoned with aconite, a substance not easily obtained. You, monsieur, have connections in the literary world, perhaps even in scientific circles. Tell me, do you know of aconite? Crane's hands stilled, his eyes widening. Aconite. I've heard of it, vaguely. Something about plants, isn't it? But I'm no chemist. I deal in books, not poisons. You're barking up the wrong tree, Mr. Poirot. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. And yet, monsieur, you were desperate. A man in your position, facing ruin, might consider drastic measures. The signing, it was crowded, chaotic. A moment's distraction, and a skilled hand could apply poison to the quill's nib. You were there, close to Grayson, until the very end. Crane shook his head vigorously, his voice rising. I stayed to lock up, yes, but I didn't do anything to his quill. I was busy with the cash box, the books. Ask anyone. Mrs. Whitby saw me tidying up after Grayson left. I went home alone, exhausted. Poirot noted the desperation in Crane's tone, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool room. And this cash box, monsieur, where was it kept? Near the table, perhaps? Crane hesitated, his fingers twisting the handkerchief. It was behind the table, yes. I had to move papers to get to it. But I didn't touch the quill, I swear. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Very well, Monsieur Crane. Let us speak of the evening itself. You saw Mademoiselle Marsh argue with Grayson, oui? And Mademoiselle Belle, she was close to him, asking for an inscription. Did you notice anything unusual? Anything that struck you as out of place? Crane rubbed his temples, his eyes distant. It was a blur, Mr. Poirot. The hall was packed, 50, maybe 60 people. Grayson was in his element, charming the crowd, signing books with that quill of his. Miss Marsh was sharp with him, as usual. I heard her say something about his poems being hollow. He just smirked, called her a vulture of taste. Miss Belle was all over him, practically glowing when he spoke to her. I was too busy to notice much else. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every detail. And the quill, monsieur, was it ever left unattended? Crane frowned, thinking. I suppose there were moments when Grayson set it down. He'd shake hands, turn to talk to someone. But it was right there, on the table, in plain sight. Nobody could have tampered with it without being seen. Or perhaps, Poirot said, his voice barely above a whisper, they were seen, but not noticed. The clever murderer, he blends into the moment, his actions invisible in the crowd's chaos. Crane's eyes widened, But he said nothing, his hands now still, clutching the handkerchief like a lifeline. Poirot rose, adjusting his gloves with precision. "Merci, Monsieur Crane. You have given me much to consider. We shall verify your account with Mrs. Whitby and others. But know this. The truth it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." As they left the office, Hastings glanced back at Crane, who had slumped forward, his head in his hands. "Poor chap looks like he's carrying the weight of the world, Poirot. Do you think he's our man?" Poirot's lips curved slightly, a faint smile. "He is a man under pressure, Hastings. And pressure. It can crack even the strongest resolve. But the little grey cells, they are not yet convinced. His desperation is clear, but his access to aconite, his opportunity, these we must explore further." They stepped into the misty street, the village quiet save for the distant clatter of a cart. Poirot's mind was already turning to the next thread in the tapestry, the toxicology book in Grayson's study, the faint sheen on the quill's nib, and Crane's nervous proximity to the signing table. "We return to Rosehaven, mon ami," he said, his voice firm. "The poet's papers, they may hold more than poetry. And then we must speak to this Mrs. Whitby, the librarian. She is the keeper of the village's eyes, and her testimony, it may illuminate the shadows." As they walked, the mist swirled around them, a fitting shroud for a case that grew darker with each step. Poirot's mind, however, was a beacon, cutting through the fog with relentless clarity, determined to unmask the hand that had turned a poet's quill into an instrument of death. Chapter 6. The Fan's Devotion. The afternoon sun dipped low over St. Mary's Mead, casting long shadows across the village green, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings approached the small ivy-covered cottage where Clara Bell resided. The dwelling, tucked behind a row of hawthorn hedges, was as unassuming as its occupant, its windows adorned with lace curtains that fluttered gently in the breeze. Yet, within its walls, Poirot suspected, lay a piece of the puzzle surrounding Leonard Grayson's murder, a puzzle growing more intricate with each passing hour. Poirot, his black suit pristine despite the day's exertions, adjusted his hat and rapped sharply on the door. Hastings, ever the contrast with his slightly rumpled appearance, stood beside him, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "I say, Poirot," he murmured, "this Clara Bell seems harmless enough. A bit starry-eyed, perhaps, but a murderer? I'm not so sure." Poirot's moustache twitched, a glimmer of amusement in his green eyes. "Harmless, Hastings. The heart that loves too fiercely, it can be as dangerous as the heart that hates. We shall see what Mademoiselle Bell reveals. The little grey cells, they are ready." The door opened to reveal Clara Bell, her delicate frame almost swallowed by the doorway. Her chestnut curls framed a face pale with grief, and her wide blue eyes, rimmed with red, suggested recent tears. She clutched a worn copy of Grayson's Whispers of the Thorn, its cover creased from constant handling. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice soft and tremulous. "Please, come in. I'll help however I can. Poor Mr. Grayson. I still can't believe he's gone." The sitting room was modest, its furnishings faded, but meticulously kept. A small table held a vase of wilting roses, their scent mingling with the faint mustiness of old books. Clara gestured to a pair of armchairs, her hands trembling as she sat opposite, the book still clasped to her chest. Poirot noted the room's details, a shelf of Grayson's works, each volume annotated in a neat, fervent hand, a framed photograph of the poet at a reading, his smile captured mid-verse, and a notebook half hidden beneath a cushion, its pages filled with dense script. "Mademoiselle Belle," Poirot began, his tone gentle but precise. "You were a great admirer of Monsieur Grayson. His poetry, it spoke to you, oui? Tell me, what was it about his words that touched you so deeply?" Clara's eyes softened, a faint glow returning to them. "His words, they were like music, Mr. Poirot. They understood pain, love, the things we hide. When I read Whispers of the Thorn, it was as if he saw my soul. I went to every reading, every signing. He was kind to me, always took time to talk, even when others pressed around him." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "And at the signing, the night before his death, you were there, close to him. You asked for an inscription, and you touched his quill. None. A quill that, hours later, delivered a fatal poison." Clara's breath caught, her hands tightening around the book. Yes, I touched it, but only for a moment. He let me hold it while he signed my copy. It was beautiful, like something from a fairy tale. I didn't do anything to it, I swear. I'd never hurt him. He was everything to me." Hastings, leaning forward, spoke with a hint of skepticism. "Everything, Miss Belle. That's a strong word. Sounds like you were more than just a fan. Were you perhaps in love with him?" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked down, her fingers tracing the book's spine. "Love? No, not like that. I admired him, revered him. His poetry, it was my escape. My life hasn't been easy, Captain Hastings. My father died when I was young, and my mother's been ill. Mr. Grayson's words gave me hope, a reason to keep going." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the tremor in her voice. "A reason to keep going, mademoiselle, but also, perhaps, a reason to cling too tightly. You were at the signing until late, oui? Lily, the maid, saw you lingering near Monsieur Grayson, asking for his attention. Did he ever rebuff you, make you feel less than you hoped?" Clara shook her head vehemently, her curls bouncing. "Never. He was always kind, even when he was tired. That night, he wrote in my book, 'To Clara, whose heart hears the thorn's whisper.' It meant the world to me. I left soon after, when the crowd thinned. I didn't see anything strange, I promise." Poirot leaned back, his hands clasped, his mind sifting through her words. "And yet, mademoiselle, the quill was poisoned during that signing. Aconite, a deadly substance, was applied to its nib. You held it, you say, but did you see others near it? Mademoiselle Marsh, perhaps, during her argument with Grayson, or Monsieur Crane, handling papers." Clara's brow furrowed, her eyes distant as she recalled the evening. "It was so crowded, Mr. Poirot. Miss Marsh was sharp with him, yes, standing close to the table. I saw her hand move, like she was pointing at something. But I was focused on Mr. Grayson. Mr. Crane was there too, always fussing with the books, moving things about. I don't know. It all happened so fast." Poirot's gaze fell to the notebook peeking from beneath the cushion. "Mademoiselle, may I see that book you hide? It is, perhaps, a record of your thoughts, your feelings for Monsieur Grayson." Clara hesitated, her hand darting to the cushion as if to conceal it further. "It's just my notes. I write about his poems, what they mean to me. It's private." Poirot's voice was firm, but kind. "In a murder, mademoiselle, nothing is private. If it helps us find the truth, I must insist." Reluctantly, Clara handed over the notebook. Poirot opened it, revealing pages filled with dense, meticulous writing, quotes from Grayson's poems interspersed with her own reflections. Some passages were fervent, almost feverish. His words are my light in the dark. He sees me even when I am invisible. One entry, dated the day before the signing, caught Poirot's eye. He must know how much he means. I will make him see. Poirot closed the notebook, his expression unreadable. You felt a connection to him, mademoiselle, a bond beyond that of reader and poet. This entry, it suggests a desire to be noticed, to be special to him. Did you ever feel he did not return your devotion? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. I only wanted him to know his work mattered. I never expected anything more. I couldn't hurt him, Mr. Poirot. He was my inspiration. Poirot handed the notebook back, his mind cataloguing the intensity of her words. Merci, Mademoiselle Belle. You have been most candid. We shall speak again. For the truth, it is like a poem. It reveals itself line by line. As they left the cottage, Hastings glanced at Poirot. His brow creased. She's a queer one, Poirot. All that devotion. It's a bit much, don't you think? Could she have snapped, thinking Grayson didn't care enough? Poirot's lips curved faintly. Devotion, Hastings, is a flame that can warm or burn. Clara Belle's passion is genuine, but is it innocent? Her touch on the quill, her presence at the signing. They place her in the shadow of suspicion. Yet the aconite, the knowledge it requires, this we must explore further. They walked back toward Rosehaven, the village now cloaked in the soft hues of dusk. Poirot's thoughts turned to the signing, the crowded hall where a killer had moved unseen. Tomorrow, mon ami, he said, we return to the village hall. We must speak to Mrs. Whitby, the librarian, and others who were there. The quill was poisoned in a moment of opportunity, and someone, perhaps, saw more than they realized. As the stars began to pierce the evening sky, Poirot's mind was a whirl of the possibilities, each suspect a thread in the intricate tapestry of murder. Clara Belle's devotion, fervent and fragile, was but one piece, and the little grey cells were far from satisfied. Chapter 7. The Signing Revisited. The village hall of St. Mary's Mead stood bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon, its stone facade weathered but proud, a silent witness to the events of Leonard Grayson's final public appearance. Hercule Poirot, his black suit immaculate and his moustache a study in precision, entered the hall with Captain Hastings at his side. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint scent of wax polish and the memory of a crowd now dispersed. The chandelier above, its crystals dulled by dust, cast a muted light over the oak table where Grayson had sat, signing books with his fateful quill. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with purpose as he surveyed the room, determined to reconstruct the night of the signing and uncover the moment when murder was set in motion. Hastings, his overcoat slung over one arm, glanced around the empty hall. "Hard to imagine a crime happening here, Poirot," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "It's so ordinary. Just a village gathering, people chatting, Grayson scribbling away. How does one slip poison onto a quill in the middle of all that?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mon ami, it is in the ordinary that the extraordinary hides. The signing, it was a stage, a performance of admiration and ambition, but also of envy and deceit. The quill was poisoned here, I am certain. We must recreate the scene, note every detail, every movement, to find the crack through which the murderer slipped." He moved to the table, its surface now bare save for a few lingering ink smudges from that fateful evening. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, envisioning the hall as it had been, filled with villagers, their voices a hum of excitement, Grayson at the centre, his presence magnetic, his quill flashing as he signed copies of Whispers of the Thorn. The crowd, some 50 or 60 strong, had pressed close, their eagerness creating a chaos ripe for a subtle act of malice. Poirot opened his eyes and turned to Constable Dobbs, who had joined them, his notebook clutched like a shield. "Monsieur Dobbs, you have spoken to others who were present at the signing, oui? Tell me, what do they recall of the evening, of the table, of the quill?" Dobbs cleared his throat, flipping through his notes. Most folks were focused on Grayson, sir. He was charming, they say, making jokes, reciting bits of his poems. The quill was a talking point. He'd show it off, tell how it was a gift from an old mentor. Nobody saw anyone tamper with it. But it's like you said. Things were busy. People were coming and going, some buying books, others just watching. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the table's edge, where Grayson's chair would have been. "And the suspects, Monsieur Dobbs? Mademoiselle Marsh, Monsieur Crane, Mademoiselle Bell. Where were they in this bustle?" Dobbs consulted his notes again. Miss Marsh was seen arguing with Grayson early on, about 7:30. Mrs. Whitby, the librarian, says it was heated but short. Miss Marsh left around 9, as she claimed. Mr. Crane was all over the place, handling sales, moving books. A few folks saw him near the table, tidying papers. Miss Bell stayed close to Grayson, asking for an inscription, lingering until nearly the end. Around 10, Poirot paced slowly around the table, his steps measured, his mind painting the scene. "Let us imagine, Hastings. Here sits Grayson, the poet, his quill in hand or resting on the table. Mademoiselle Marsh approaches, her words sharp, her hand perhaps too near. Monsieur Crane, he is busy, yes, but his hands touch the papers, perhaps brush the quill. Mademoiselle Bell, she is devoted, her eyes on Grayson, but she holds the quill for a moment. And in this moment, the poison is applied, aconite, swift, and deadly." Hastings frowned, scratching his chin. "But Poirot, how? The quill was in plain sight. Wouldn't someone have noticed a bottle of poison? A cloth? Something?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The clever murderer, Hastings, does not carry a bottle labelled poison. Aconite, it can be a powder, a liquid, applied with a delicate touch. A fingertip, a small brush, even a cloth disguised as a handkerchief. The crowd, it provides cover, a distraction. A hand moves and no one sees the act for what it is." He paused, his gaze falling on a faint mark on the table's edge. A smudge, not ink, but something waxy, barely visible. Poirot knelt, examining it closely, his gloved finger hovering without touching. "Curieux," he murmured. "This mark, it is not ink nor dust. It could be a residue, perhaps from the poison's application. We must have it analyzed, along with the quill." Dobbs, watching intently, scribbled a note. "I'll get it to the chemist in London, sir. But what does it mean? A wax of some kind?" Poirot rose, his expression enigmatic. "It means, Monsieur Dobbs, that the murderer was careful, but not careful enough. The quill was poisoned here, in this hall, during a moment of distraction. We must find that moment." To deepen his understanding, Poirot requested Mrs. Whitby, the librarian, be summoned. She arrived promptly, a stout woman with greying hair and a no-nonsense demeanour, her arms crossed as she stood near the table. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice brisk, "I've told Constable Dobbs all I know, but I'll tell you again. The signing was a lively affair. Grayson was in fine form, though he could be sharp with those who crossed him." Poirot inclined his head, his tone courteous. "Madame Whitby, your eyes, they are the eyes of the village. You see what others miss. Tell me, what did you observe of Mademoiselle Marsh, Monsieur Crane, and Mademoiselle Belle?" Mrs. Whitby pursed her lips, her memory sharp. Miss Marsh was prickly, as always. She argued with Grayson about his latest work, called it overblown. He fired back, something about her lacking soul. She stormed off around 9, as I told the constable. I saw her at the door, putting on her coat. Mr. Crane was a nervous wreck, flitting about, stacking books, counting money. He was near the table often, but I didn't see him touch the quill. Miss Belle, now, she was like a moth to a flame, hung on Grayson's every word, begged for a special inscription. She held his quill for a moment. I saw it myself. But he was right there, watching. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the quill, madame, was it ever left alone, unattended?" Mrs. Whitby hesitated, her brow creasing. "Not alone, exactly. Grayson set it down now and then, to shake hands, to sip water, but it was always there, on the table, in view. I suppose there was a moment, late in the evening, when the crowd was thickest. Grayson was reciting a poem, and everyone was listening. The table was a bit ignored then." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind seizing on a clue. "A recitation, you say? A moment when all eyes were on Grayson, not his quill. How long did this last?" Mrs. Whitby thought for a moment. "A few minutes, maybe 5. He read the Thorns' lament, and the room was spellbound. Even I stopped to listen." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. 5 minutes, a window wide enough for a deft hand to act. He turned to the table, imagining the scene. Grayson standing, his voice weaving poetry, the crowd entranced, the quill lying vulnerable. "Merci, Madame Whitby," he said. "You have painted a picture most vivid. One last question. Did you see anyone, a stranger perhaps, near the table during this recitation?" Mrs. Whitby shook her head. "No strangers, Mr. Poirot. Just the usual folk, villagers, a few from out of town. But it was crowded, and I was busy at the door, checking tickets." Poirot dismissed her with a nod, then turned to Hastings. "The recitation, Hastings, it is the key. A moment when the quill was unguarded, yet not unnoticed. The murderer, he or she, was bold, blending into the crowd, their action swift and silent." Hastings rubbed his temples, his mind struggling to keep pace. But who, Poirot? Marsh was gone by then, wasn't she? Crane was busy, and Clara was mooning over Grayson. Could someone else have slipped in? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Possible, oui, but unlikely. The murderer knew Grayson's habits, knew the quill's importance. It is one of our 3. Marsh, Crane, or Bell. The waxy smudge, it may tell us more. We must await the chemist's report. As they left the hall, the village settling into the hush of evening, Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of images. Marsh's gloved hand, Crane's nervous fidgeting, Clara's fervent gaze. The quill, poisoned in a fleeting moment, held the truth, and Poirot was determined to wrest it free. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice firm. "To Rosehaven we return. The poet's papers, they may yet speak, and tomorrow we seek the chemist's findings. The little grey cells, they are close to the truth, but not yet close enough." The hall stood silent behind them, its secrets locked within its walls, waiting for Poirot's relentless mind to set them free. Chapter 8. A Hidden Clue. The evening shadows lengthened across the garden of Rosehaven, Leonard Grayson's cottage, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings returned to the scene of the poet's demise. The air was heavy with the scent of fading roses and damp earth, and the study, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding secrets only Poirot's keen mind could coax forth. The detective's polished shoes clicked softly on the wooden floor, his black suit a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos of Grayson's desk, where papers, ink, and the infamous quill had played their part in a deadly drama. Hastings, his overcoat now draped over his arm, surveyed the room with a mix of awe and unease. "This place gives me the shivers, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "It's as if Grayson's still here, watching us. That quill, it's like a ghost sitting there." Poirot's moustache twitched, a flicker of amusement in his green eyes. "A ghost, Hastings? No, it is merely an object, but one that speaks if we listen. The quill, it was the instrument of murder. But it is the study, its papers, its secrets, that will lead us to the hand that wielded it." He approached the desk, his gloved hands hovering over the scattered documents. The quill, now in the hands of a London chemist for analysis, was absent, but its presence lingered in the faint ink stains on the blotting pad and the unfinished poem that lay beneath a stack of drafts. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the shelves of poetry and philosophy, the toxicology book that had piqued his interest, and a small, overlooked detail. A single feather, plucked from the quill, still tucked in his handkerchief from an earlier visit. "Mon ami," Poirot said, holding up the feather. "This. It is a curiosity. Not broken, but plucked, as if in haste. A small thing. Yet the little grey cells, they find it significant. Perhaps it fell in the act of poisoning, a moment of carelessness." Hastings frowned, peering at the feather. "Carelessness? That doesn't sound like our murderer, Poirot. Whoever did this was precise. Aconite on the nib, applied in a crowded hall. Why leave a feather behind?" Poirot's lips curved faintly. "Even the most precise mind, Hastings, can falter under pressure. The signing, it was a moment of opportunity, but also of risk. Let us see what else this room reveals." He turned to the papers, sifting through them with care. Among the drafts was the manuscript of the Critic's Claw, its lines sharp and mocking, with Grayson's handwritten note, "E.M. will never forgive this." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he set it aside, his fingers brushing a folded letter tucked beneath a volume of Keats. He unfolded it, revealing Crane's handwriting, its tone desperate. "Leonard, I beg you, reconsider. Crane and Sons cannot survive without you. Name your terms, but stay." The letter was dated a week before the signing, its creases worn, as if Grayson had read it multiple times. "Curieux," Poirot murmured. "Monsieur Crane's desperation, it is laid bare. But is it the desperation of a man who pleads, or one who plots?" Hastings leaned over, reading the letter. "Sounds like he was at his wits' end, Poirot. If Grayson left, Crane's business was done for. That's a motive, isn't it?" Poirot nodded, but his attention shifted to another find. A small envelope, its wax seal broken, addressed to Grayson in a feminine hand. Inside was a letter from Clara Bell, its words fervent and almost poetic. "Your verses are my solace, my light. I live for the moments we share at your readings. Please, let me be more than a face in the crowd." The letter was dated 2 months prior, and its intensity sent a chill through Poirot's methodical mind. "Clara Bell," he said softly. "Her devotion, it borders on obsession. This letter, it is a cry for recognition, perhaps for something deeper. Did Grayson rebuff her, or encourage her?" Hastings scratched his chin. "She seemed genuine enough, Poirot, but that letter, it's intense. Could she have turned on him if he didn't return her feelings?" Poirot did not answer immediately, his gaze returning to the desk. He knelt, examining the underside, where a faint scratch caught his eye. A mark not of ink, but of metal, as if something had grazed the wood. "This," he said, pointing. "It is another detail. The quill's nib, perhaps dropped or mishandled, or something else, a tool used to apply the poison." He rose, his mind weaving connections. The study was a treasure trove of clues, each whispering a fragment of the truth. The toxicology book, the feather, the scratch, the letters, all pointed to a motive rooted in Grayson's relationships, his words a catalyst for murder. Poirot turned to the bookshelf, pulling down the toxicology volume he had noticed earlier. Its pages were pristine, but a single bookmark, a pressed rose petal, marked a chapter on aconite. "Mon ami," he said, showing it to Hastings, "this is no coincidence. Someone in this house had an interest in poisons, or wished us to think so. Grayson, or his killer?" Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "It's too much, Poirot. The critic, the publisher, the fan, each with a reason, each with a chance. How do you make sense of it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "By order and method, Hastings. The little grey cells, they arrange the facts, discard the irrelevant, and find the pattern. The quill was poisoned at the signing, but the motive, it was born here, in this study, among these papers, these words." He moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening garden. "Let us consider the suspects. Evelyn Marsh, her pride wounded by Grayson's satire, her knowledge of chemistry a tool for revenge. Victor Crane, his livelihood threatened, his hands near the quill during the signing. Clara Bell, her devotion a flame that could burn or destroy. And this room, it holds the echoes of their motives." Poirot's attention returned to the desk, where a small ink stain caught his eye, not on the blotting pad, but on the wood itself, near the scratch. He leaned closer, his gloved finger tracing the air above it. "This stain, it is not ordinary ink. It has a sheen like the residue on the quill's nib. Aconite, perhaps, or its carrier. The chemist's report it will confirm. But already the picture grows clearer." Hastings, ever practical, ventured a question. "What about the waxy smudge you found in the hall, Poirot? Could it be related?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his approval. "Bien pensé, Hastings. The smudge in the hall, the stain here, the feather, they are threads in the same tapestry. The murderer applied the poison with care, but left traces, small but significant. We must await the chemist's findings, but I suspect they will point to a method, perhaps a wax or oil to hold the aconite, applied with a tool or cloth." He stepped back, his mind a whirl of connections. The signing, it was the stage, but this study, it was the heart of the crime. Grayson's words, his relationships, they stirred a passion that led to murder. We must speak to Mrs. Whitby again, and to others who were near the table. Someone saw something, even if they did not know it. As they prepared to leave, Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the unfinished poem. Its final line, scrawled in haste, read, "The quill betrays the hand that wields it." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Grayson, he knew the power of his words, and perhaps he sensed his danger. But he did not see the hand that struck. The study fell silent as they departed, the papers and books standing as mute witnesses to a poet's end. Outside, the village was cloaked in twilight, its quiet lanes hiding a truth that Poirot was determined to uncover, one hidden clue at a time. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice resolute. "Tomorrow we pursue the chemist's report and the librarian's memory. The little grey cells, they are close, so close, to the truth." Chapter 9. The Motive. Unravelled. The village hall of St. Mary's Mead, bathed in the pale light of a late October morning, stood as a solemn stage for Hercule Poirot's gathering of the suspects. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of wood smoke from nearby chimneys, and the hall's interior, with its polished oak table and faded tapestries, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Poirot, his black suit immaculate, his moustache a paragon of symmetry, stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding despite his small stature. Captain Hastings, seated to his right, adjusted his tie nervously, his notebook open but untouched, sensing the gravity of the moment. The three suspects, Evelyn Marsh, Victor Crane, and Clara Bell, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a study in contrasting emotions. Evelyn Marsh, her auburn hair tightly pinned, sat with a posture of defiant rigidity, her gloved hands folded, her grey eyes cold and unyielding. Victor Crane, his ink-stained fingers twitching, seemed to shrink into his chair, his eyes darting between Poirot and the table, as if seeking escape. Clara Bell, clutching her worn copy of Whispers of the Thorn, looked fragile, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears, her chestnut curls framing a face pale with apprehension. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was calm but resonant, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are gathered here to confront the truth of Leonard Grayson's murder. He was killed not by chance, but by design. A quill, his cherished tool, laced with aconite, a poison most rare and deadly. The act was committed here, in this hall, during the signing of his final work. One of you, I am certain, is the hand behind this crime." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes moving from one suspect to another. "The motive. It is the heart of this matter. Grayson's words, they were sharp, cutting deep into the pride, the ambition, the devotion of those around him. Each of you had reason to resent him, but only one had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the will to act." Evelyn Marsh's voice broke the silence, sharp and impatient. "This is preposterous, Mr. Poirot. I've told you, I left the signing early. I had no part in this. If you're looking for a motive, look to Crane. He was desperate to keep Grayson, and failing that, who knows what he'd do?" Crane's head snapped up, his voice trembling with indignation. "Me? That's nonsense. Grayson was my livelihood. I'd have been ruined without him. But I didn't kill him. What about Miss Bell? She was obsessed, always hovering, touching his things. That quill. She held it." Clara's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. "I loved him, Mr. Poirot. His poetry was my world. I'd never hurt him. Never." Her hands tightened around her book, as if it were a shield. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough. Let us examine the facts, not accusations. The quill was poisoned during the signing, in a moment when Grayson was distracted, likely during his recitation of the Thorn's lament, when all eyes were upon him. 5 minutes, a fleeting window, but enough for a deft hand to apply aconite to the nib. He turned to Evelyn Marsh, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Marsh, You are a woman of intellect, trained in chemistry, with access to rare substances through your academic connections. Grayson's poem, The Critic's Claw, struck at your reputation, mocking you before a literary audience. Such a wound, it doesn't heal easily. You argued with him at the signing, leaned close to his table, your gloved hand near the quill. Your gloves, mademoiselle. They are a habit, you say. But also a shield, non? A shield against the poison you applied. Marsh's face paled, but her voice remained steady. You're grasping at straws, Mr. Poirot. Yes, I argued with him. His work was insufferable, and he taunted me. But I left at 9, as Mrs. Whitby confirmed. I didn't touch his quill, and I certainly didn't poison it. Chemistry. That was years ago. I deal in words now, not toxins. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his relentless focus. Words, mademoiselle, can be as poisonous as aconite, and your alibi, it is not without flaws. Mrs. Whitby saw you at the door, yes, but the hall was so crowded, the light dim. A clever woman could linger, unseen, during the recitation. He turned to Victor Crane, whose hands were now clenched into fists. Monsieur Crane, your desperation was evident. Grayson's threats to leave Crane and Sons would have ruined you. You were at the signing until the end, handling papers near the quill, your movements unnoticed in the bustle. A man at the edge of ruin, he might take a desperate step, non? Crane shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. I told you, Mr. Poirot, I needed him alive. I was tidying, yes, but I didn't touch the quill. I swear it. Ask anyone. I was counting money, stacking books. I had no time for poison. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Time, monsieur, is a matter of moments. A waxy smudge on the table, a residue on the quill. These suggest a careful application, perhaps with a tool you could conceal. Your desperation, it is a motive most compelling. Finally, he turned to Clara Bell, whose tears now spilled freely. Mademoiselle Bell, your devotion to Grayson was profound, almost a worship. Your letter to him, it spoke of a desire to be seen, to be more than a fan. You held the quill during the signing, a moment of intimacy. But if Grayson did not return your feelings, if he dismissed you, could your love have turned to rage? Clara's voice broke, a sob escaping her. No, Mr. Poirot. I only wanted his words, his kindness. He gave me that inscription. It was enough. I held the quill, yes, but he was there, watching. I didn't do anything to it. Poirot paused, letting the silence weigh upon them. He reached into his pocket, producing a small vial containing the feather he had found in Grayson's study. This feather, plucked from the quill, was found beneath the desk, a sign of haste, perhaps, in the act of poisoning. And the waxy smudge in this hall, the stain in the study, they match a substance used to carry aconite, applied with precision. He faced Evelyn Marsh again, his voice steady. Mademoiselle, the chemist's report arrived this morning. The residue on the quill and the table contains traces of a wax used in chemical labs, a substance you, with your background, would know. During your argument with Grayson, you leaned close, your gloved hand near the quill. The recitation provided your moment, 5 minutes when all eyes were on him. You applied the poison, knowing he would use the quill the next morning. Marsh stood, her chair scraping back, her eyes blazing. This is outrageous. You have no proof, only conjecture. I left the hall. You can't place me there during the recitation. Poirot's voice was calm, unyielding. The proof, mademoiselle, is in the details. The wax, the gloves, your knowledge of aconite, all point to you. And the motive, your humiliation, it burned deep. Grayson's poem was not just a jest. It was a wound to your pride, your career. You struck back, not with words, but with death. Marsh's composure cracked, her voice rising to a scream. He mocked me. That poem ruined me, made me a laughingstock. I wanted him to suffer, just once, to feel the sting of his own venom. She sank back, sobbing, her gloves falling to the table. I didn't mean for him to die. I thought it would sicken him, make him stop. Poirot nodded, his expression sombre. The aconite, it was too potent, mademoiselle. Your revenge, it became murder. Constable Dobbs stepped forward, his face grim, as Marsh's confession hung in the air. Crane and Clara sat stunned, their own burdens lifted, but their shock palpable. Poirot turned to them. Monsieur Crane, Mademoiselle Belle, your motives were strong, but not strong enough. The truth, it has found its voice. As Marsh was led away, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. Good Lord, Poirot, you had her from the start, didn't you? Those gloves, that wax, it all fell into place. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The little grey cells, Hastings, they see what others miss. The quill, it was the poet's weapon, but also his downfall. Now, let us leave this hall to its silence. The village hall stood quiet as they departed, its role in the drama complete. The truth of Grayson's murder laid bare by Poirot's relentless pursuit. Chapter 10. The Confession. The village hall of St. Mary's Mead, now cloaked in the sombre hues of late afternoon, seemed to exhale as the weight of Evelyn Marsh's confession settled over the room. The chandelier above cast flickering shadows, mirroring the unease that lingered in the air. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the oak table, his small frame radiating a quiet triumph, his green eyes steady as he observed the scene. Captain Hastings, seated beside him, closed his notebook with a soft snap, his face a mix of astonishment and relief. The suspects, Evelyn Marsh, Victor Crane, and Clara Bell, remained in their chairs, each processing the revelation in their own way. Evelyn Marsh, her composure shattered, sat slumped, her gloved hands trembling on the table. Her auburn hair, once tightly pinned, had loosened, a stray lock falling across her tear-streaked face. Her voice, when she spoke again, was a broken whisper. I only wanted him to feel it, Mr. Poirot. The humiliation, the pain. His poem, it stripped me bare before everyone I respected. I thought the aconite would make him ill, force him to stop his mockery. I never meant for him to die. Poirot's moustache twitched, but his expression was one of solemn understanding. Mademoiselle Marsh, the heart that seeks revenge, it often misjudges its own strength. The aconite, it was not a mere warning. It was a death sentence. You applied it to the quill during the recitation, when Grayson's voice held the crowd. Oui. Marsh nodded, her sobs muffled. Yes, during the Thorn's lament. Everyone was watching him, hanging on his words. I leaned over the table as if to argue again, but I had the wax in my glove, a small pellet mixed with aconite from an old lab sample. I pressed it onto the nib, just a touch. It was so quick, no one saw. Hastings leaned forward, his brow creased. But how did you know he'd use the quill the next morning? It could have been anyone at the signing who got hurt. Marsh's eyes flickered with guilt. I knew his habits. Grayson was obsessive about that quill. He used it for all his writing, especially in his study. He'd dip it in ink the moment he sat down to work. I thought it would sicken him, make him suffer, not kill him. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm, The poison, mademoiselle, it does not distinguish between intention and outcome. The wax, it held the aconite in place, ensuring it would transfer to his skin with the first stroke. Your knowledge of chemistry, it was your weapon, but also your undoing. He turned to Constable Dobbs, who stood near the door, his face grim, but resolute. Monsieur Dobbs, Mademoiselle Marsh has confessed to the murder of Leonard Grayson. You will take her into custody with care, for she has spoken the truth, and that it is a step toward justice. Dobbs stepped forward, his movements measured, as he gently guided Marsh to her feet. She offered no resistance, her defiance drained, her gloves now discarded on the table like shed skin. As she was led away, her parting words were a whisper. I only wanted him to stop, to feel what I felt. Victor Crane, his nervous energy now stilled, looked up at Poirot, his eyes wide with relief, but also guilt. I thought it might have been me, Mr. Poirot. I was so desperate, so afraid of losing him. But I couldn't have done this. Thank you for seeing that. Clara Bell, her face pale, clutched her book tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was my light, she said softly. I'm glad it wasn't me. But oh, Mr. Poirot, why did it have to happen at all? Poirot's gaze softened as he addressed them. Monsieur Crane, Mademoiselle Bell, your motives were strong, but they were not murderous. The heart of the critic, it was wounded too deeply, and her pride, it became her poison. You are free of this crime, but not of its shadow. Grayson's words, they stirred passions, and passions, they can destroy. He turned to Hastings, who was still processing the confession. Come, mon ami, let us leave this hall to its silence. The truth, it has been found, but the cost, it is heavy. As they stepped into the cool evening air, the village seemed to sigh, its quiet lanes reclaiming their peace. Hastings glanced at Poirot, his voice low. You were brilliant, Poirot. The gloves, the wax, the recitation. You saw it all from the start, didn't you? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes were somber. No, Hastings, not from the start. The little grey cells, they worked. They pieced together the fragments, the feather, the smudge, the stain, the letter. But it was the motive, the wound of pride, that pointed to Mademoiselle Marsh. Her confession, it confirms what the clues whispered. They walked toward Rosehaven, the cottage now a silent monument to Grayson's life and death. Poirot's thoughts lingered on the poet's final poem, its cryptic line about the Quill's betrayal. Grayson, he sensed the danger in his words, he mused. He wrote of betrayal, but did not see its form until it was too late. Hastings nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's a sad business, Poirot. A man killed by his own quill, by the very thing that made him who he was. And Marsh, she'll carry that guilt forever. Poirot's voice was quiet, reflective. Oui, mon ami. The quill, it was his genius, but also his downfall. And for Mademoiselle Marsh, her revenge has become her prison. The truth, it sets some free, but others, it binds. As they reached the cottage, the stars began to emerge, piercing the velvet sky. Poirot paused, his gaze distant. Tomorrow, Hastings, we ensure the chemist's report is filed, and we speak to the magistrate. The case, it is closed, but the echoes of Grayson's words, they will linger in this village. The night closed around them, the mystery of the poisoned quill resolved, yet its shadow cast long over St. Mary's Mead, a reminder of the power of words and the peril of wounded pride. Chapter 11. The poet's legacy. The twilight of St. Mary's Mead draped the village in a gentle hush, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of autumn leaves, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked along the winding lane from Rosehaven. The poet's cottage, now silent, stood as a monument to Leonard Grayson's brilliance and his tragic end. The weight of Evelyn Marsh's confession lingered, a sombre resolution to a case that had stirred the village's quiet heart. Poirot, his black suit still pristine despite the day's exertions, walked with a measured step, his green eyes reflective under the brim of his hat. Hastings, beside him, carried a thoughtful expression, his hands thrust into his coat pockets. "I say, Poirot," Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "it's a grim business, isn't it?" Grayson's words cut so deep they drove a woman to murder. Makes you wonder about the power of a poet's pen. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile touching his lips. "Oui, mon ami. The pen, it is mightier than the sword, but also more dangerous. Grayson's words, they were his gift and his curse. They stirred love, hate, devotion, and in the end, they invited his doom. But his legacy, it will endure beyond the Quill's betrayal." They paused at the village green, where a few late roses clung to their stems, their petals glowing faintly in the fading light. The events of the day, Marsh's tearful confession, the stunned relief of Crane and Bell, had left the village in a state of quiet shock. Poirot's mind, however, was already turning to the aftermath, to the ripples left by a crime so intricately woven. "Hastings," he said, his voice low but firm, "we must ensure that Grayson's work is not forgotten. His poetry, it spoke to the heart of this village, to Clara Bell's solace, even to Evelyn Marsh's pride. We shall suggest a memorial, perhaps a reading in the hall, to honor his words, not his death." Hastings nodded, his brow creasing. "A fine idea, Poirot. It'd do the village good to remember him for his art, not the scandal. But what about Marsh? She's facing a trial now, isn't she? Poor woman. Her life's ruined, all for a moment's revenge." Poirot's expression grew sombre. Mademoiselle Marsh, she chose her path when she laced the quill with aconite. Her motive, pride wounded by Grayson's satire, was a fire that consumed her reason. The law, it will judge her, but the true punishment, it is the guilt she will carry. The little grey cells, they have done their work, but the heart, it feels the tragedy. They continued their walk, passing the tea-room where they had questioned Marsh, its windows now dark. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the clues that had unravelled the case. The waxy smudge in the hall, the stain in the study, the plucked feather, the toxicology book with its pressed rose petal. Each had been a thread in the tapestry of murder, woven together by his relentless logic. Yet it was the human passions, Marsh's humiliation, Crane's desperation, Bell's devotion, that had given the clues their meaning. "Hastings," Poirot said, pausing near the churchyard, where the spire loomed against the starry sky. "Consider the suspects we have cleared. Monsieur Crane, his fear of ruin was real, but his hands were clean of poison. Mademoiselle Bell, her love for Grayson was intense, but it was not the love that kills. The truth, it lay in Marsh's heart, in the wound that Grayson's poem inflicted." Hastings sighed, his breath visible in the cool air. "It's a sad affair, Poirot. A man killed by his own quill, a woman destroyed by her own pride. Makes you wonder if Grayson knew the trouble he was stirring with his words." Poirot's eyes gleamed, catching the starlight. "He knew, mon ami. his final poem, its line about the quill's betrayal. It was no accident. Grayson sensed the danger in his art, the way it provoked. But he did not foresee the form it would take, nor the hand that would wield it. They reached the small house where Hastings was staying, its windows glowing warmly. Poirot declined an invitation for tea, his mind still occupied. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we speak to the magistrate to ensure the case is properly documented. The chemist's report, it confirms the wax and aconite, and Marsh's confession, it seals her fate. But we must also write to the village council, propose the memorial reading. Grayson's words, they must live on." As Hastings bid him good night, Poirot lingered in the lane, his gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of Rosehaven. The poet's legacy, he knew, was not just in his verses, but in the lives he had touched, for better or worse. The case was closed, the truth laid bare, but the echoes of Grayson's quill would resonate in St. Mary's Mead long after Poirot's departure. He turned, his steps light but purposeful, and walked into the night, the little grey cells at rest, but ever ready for the next mystery to unravel. Chapter 12. The final verse. The train to London rattled through the countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the quiet musings of Hercule Poirot, who sat in a first-class compartment, his gloved hands folded neatly in his lap. The morning light streamed through the window, casting a soft glow on his immaculate black suit and the perfectly waxed points of his moustache. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, leafed through a newspaper, though his attention kept drifting to his friend, whose green eyes were fixed on the passing fields, lost in thought. The case of Leonard Grayson's murder, resolved with Evelyn Marsh's confession, had left St. Mary's Mead behind, but its echoes lingered in Poirot's meticulous mind. "Hastings," Poirot said at last, his voice low but clear, "the affair of the poisoned quill, it is complete, yet it leaves a taste, non?" The poet, his words were a spark that ignited a fatal fire. It is a reminder, perhaps, that the creations of the heart can wound as deeply as any blade. Hastings folded his newspaper, his brow creasing. "It's a rum business, Poirot. Grayson's poetry stirred up so much, love, hate, obsession, and poor Marsh, ruined by her own pride. You saw it all so clearly, the gloves, the wax, the recitation. I don't know how you do it." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes twinkling. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see the patterns where others see only chaos. The quill, it was not just a tool of murder, but a symbol of Grayson's power, his ability to provoke, to inspire, to destroy the clues, the feather, the smudge, the stain. They were but signposts to the truth hidden in Evelyn Marsh's heart." He reached into his pocket, producing a small envelope containing a letter he had penned before leaving the village. It was addressed to the saint. Mary's Mead Village Council, proposing a memorial reading of Grayson's poetry in the village hall. His words, Hastings, they must not be forgotten. They were his legacy, and they belong to the village, to Clara Bell, to all who found solace in them. Let the reading be a tribute not to his death, but to his art. Hastings nodded, his expression softening. "A fine gesture, Poirot. It'll mean a lot to Clara, especially. She was heartbroken, but her love for his work, it was pure, wasn't it?" "Oui," Poirot replied, his gaze returning to the window. Her devotion, it was a flame that warmed, not burned, unlike Mademoiselle Marsh, whose pride turned her love of words into a weapon. The quill, it betrayed them both, Grayson with its poison. Marsh with its consequences. The train's whistle sounded, a mournful note that seemed to echo the case's sombre resolution. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the study at Rosehaven, where the poet's final poem had hinted at betrayal, its cryptic line a prophecy unheeded. The toxicology book, the plucked feather, the waxy residue, all had played their part. But it was the human passions, Marsh's wounded pride, Crane's desperate ambition, Bell's fervent adoration, that had given the clues their weight. "Hastings," Poirot said, breaking the silence, "you recall the letter from Clara Bell, her words of longing to be seen?" It was a cry from the heart, but not a cry for vengeance. And Crane's letter, pleading for Grayson to stay. It was the voice of a man clinging to survival, not plotting murder. Only Marsh's silence, her guarded gloves, her chemical knowledge, pointed to the truth. Hastings leaned back, his hands clasped behind his head. "You make it sound so simple, Poirot. But it was anything but. That moment at the signing, during the recitation, Marsh slipping the poison onto the quill in front of everyone, yet unseen. It's chilling." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his quiet satisfaction. "Chilling, oui, but also human. The crowd, they saw Grayson, his voice, his charisma. They did not see the hand that moved in the shadow of his brilliance, the little grey cells. They saw what the eyes missed." As the train neared London, Poirot's thoughts turned to the formalities that awaited. The magistrate's review of Marsh's confession, the chemist's report confirming the aconite-laced wax, the final documentation of a case closed with precision. Yet, for Poirot, the true resolution lay not in the arrest, but in the restoration of order, the assurance that Grayson's poetry would live on, its beauty untarnished by the poison that ended its creator. He handed the envelope to Hastings. "Post this when we arrive, mon ami. The village, it must heal, and Grayson's words, they are the balm. And now, I think, it is time for a tisane, a moment of calm before the next challenge." Hastings grinned, taking the envelope. "Tea for you, maybe, but I'll have a brandy. This case deserves a toast, Poirot. You've done it again." Poirot's smile was modest, his eyes warm. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they do their work, but the heart, it feels the cost. Let us toast not to victory, but to truth, and to the poet whose quill, though silenced, will speak forever." The train rolled into the station, the city's clamour a stark contrast to the village's quiet. Poirot stepped onto the platform, his mind at rest, the case of the Poisoned Quill a chapter closed, its final verse written in the enduring power of a poet's words.